Welcome everyone to the second part of this tutorial where we are making a fun little doghouse. In this section, I'll be introducing you to edit mode. This is where we can transform our simple primitive forms into more complex objects, such as this basic cylinder modeled into a pillar. While there are a lot more tools at our disposal in this mode, we'll be covering the most common ones used to get us started. This is where we left off last time in our project. Let's go ahead and select the main cube for the main doghouse. Go ahead into the top left button here for this drop-down menu, and let's go into edit mode. You can also press tab as a shortcut to switch between the two last modes that you were on. So going back to object mode and to edit mode with the tab. Or my preferred method is to activate the pie menu by pressing Control, Tab, and you'll get that drop-down menu, but in a pie menu form. So I can just hover to the object mode and edit mode to switch back and forth. Or if I need to sculpt, I can go down to sculpting mode. Okay, so back to edit mode here. And you'll find that you now have multiple options on this left toolbar. So let's go ahead and see what they are called by just clicking and dragging here to the edge. I mean, you can actually see the names of some of the tools that we'll be utilizing in edit mode. And before we can make some proper changes to our objects, we'll need to know what we are selecting in edit mode. So on the top left here, we have three icons. The first one being vertex select, where we can left click on these little dots, these vertices, and select that. And if we use a move function, we can see that we're pulling on that vertex. You can also select two or more vertices by holding down Shift and selecting. And in turn, it moves these two vertices or this entire edge between them. So the second option here is edge select mode. And you can see here with the white highlight what's being selected, and I could move the entire edge or multiple edges if I shift selected them as well. And this third icon here is for face select. So now we can left click on a particular face or multiple faces if you hold down Shift. So if I were to move this a little higher, so G and then Z, you can see that I'm moving the face on this object and in turn also changing the size of the object. To switch between the different select modes, you can press 1 for vertex select, 2 for edge, and 3 for face select. So definitely useful shortcuts to get the hang of as you're switching between what you are needing to select. Let's go ahead and go to face select or number 3, select the top face. And this is where it's up to you if you want to make your doghouse a little bit shorter or taller or keep it the same height. But I'm actually gonna drop mine down just a little bit. So I'm gonna press G and then Z to move it down just a little bit. Just thinking about a small to medium sized dog, and it's up to you how large you want to make this doghouse. But I just want to make a little change there. So I use the move tool on the Z axis. From here, we're going to go over to the extrude faces, extrude region, while this top face is selected. And from here, I'm going to pull on this yellow icon and move it up here. This will be the height of the roof, the angled roof. And then from here, I'm going to go on to scale, shrink it on the x-axis, on the top face, right about there. And all of a sudden, we have a roof shape on our doghouse. And if you'd like to make some further edits to this, you can take that face and move it up and down, depending on how steep you want this roof. I'm quite happy with it right around here. Let's tab back into object mode and we'll revisit that doghouse. let's go ahead and pick the doggy bowl. And right now it's still named as a cylinder. For organization purposes, let's go ahead and rename our object. So you can either double click here to rename it, or a useful shortcut is F2 while the object is selected, and we can just name this doggy bowl. Okay, from here, let's go into edit mode. Let's hit the face select for the top face. And we're going to be using the inset faces function. So left click there, and we're going to drag this in very slowly. Now, if it's going in very quickly, you can hold down Shift to slow it down. And we are going to just inset it to about here. From here, let's go to extrude region on this plus icon. We could bring it down. And then from there, we could go to scale and scale it in just a little bit. All of a sudden, we have a bowl shape. Pretty cool. Next up, we are going to be using the bevel. But before we do that, I want to make an important note here. So let's tab back into object mode. Let's open up the panel right here. And we can see that the scale on here is not equal to 1. So this is very important before we add any bevels or modifiers in the future. So to simply make this equal to 1, we are going to go to Object, Apply, or Control A for the shortcut, and apply the scale. So from here, we are now seeing a 1-to-1 ratio on our scale. And I'll quickly show you why that's important. You don't have to do this right now. So here's a cube, and I'll stretch it out. And you can see when I scale it on the X, that the scale here is quite different on the X axis. I'm going to duplicate this accordingly. Okay, so from here, I'm going to apply the scale to one of these boxes. Control A, scale. So this one's 1-to-1, but this one is not. I'm going to hit isolation mode so we can see just these two, and that is the / key. On this one, if I go to edit mode, select this edge, go to bevel, and once I bevel this, you can see a nice 45-degree angle beveling on that edge. If I do the same bevel function to this edge, we can see that it is very stretched out. So it's not at a 45-degree angle, and that is due to the scale not being at a 1-to-1 ratio. So this is going to be very important moving forward. So it's best practice to apply our scale in object mode before we do any beveling or adding modifiers to our object. Now that our bowl has a 1-to-1 scale, let's tab back into edit mode, and we'll go into edge select. So number 2, we will select this upper ring on the inside, and to select the whole entire ring, we are going to hold down Alt and left click. And to select the outer ring at the same time, I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt, left click on this outer edge. So now we have these two edges on the inside and out all selected. To activate the bevel, we can also press Control B as the shortcut. And then from there, you can see us beveling these two edges. So you don't want to go too far in where they start to cross each other. So that's going to present some problems. So just a little bit here. I can also scroll on the mouse wheel to add some extra edges to make it even smoother and rounder. But too much, this is a little bit overkill. So think about 2 extra rings is enough. Left click. And if we want to make some adjustments, we have this drop down menu, and you could still increase the amount of segments or decrease it accordingly. You could also change the shape of the bevel if needed. But for starters, 0.5 is a good one. That's even all across. All right, so now we have a rounded lip on the bowl, and it's not so sharp anymore. Okay, tab back into object mode, and let's go ahead and pick our next object to make some changes to. Next up, let's go ahead and shape some of these rocks so they are not such perfect spheres. But one thing to note is, since we were scaling these in object mode from before, a lot of their scaling is not at a 1-to-1 ratio. So let's go ahead and fix that now all at once. And an easy way to do that is to press A to select everything in object mode. You're going to press Control A and apply the scale. So from here, we can see that all of the objects in the scene now have a 1-to-1 scale. Let's select this sphere over here, and this will be perhaps a rock. Tab into edit mode, and I'm going to go to vertice select and pick a few of these vertices to move around. I'm going to press GZ to maybe flatten out this area, just giving it a more angled look so it's not such a perfect circle. G, move it around. I can go to edge select mode, maybe select both of these edges. G, move it across. Okay, so it's starting to look more like a rock. I'm going to shift select these faces in face select mode. G, Y, maybe to stretch it out. There we go. Then maybe this is looking a little bit too pointy, so I'm going to move it in just a little bit. There we go. So looking more like a nicely shaped rock. Let's go ahead and move on to this UV sphere over here. And we can see that there are a lot more vertices and faces. Let's tab into edit mode. And one thing you'll probably run into is when you start moving these around, it's maybe a little bit too sharp and it's a little bit too angular. So an option that we can utilize here is to use proportional editing, which we can activate with this top icon up above, or the shortcut is the letter O. So once we have this activated, when we select, let's say, this face here, move it across, you will then find this circle of influence, which you can change the size of with your scroll wheel on your mouse. And whatever is inside that circle will be influenced when you either move it around or scale accordingly. So this gives it a nice, smoother effect when you are moving things around, modeling your object. It can give it a more organic look as well. So go ahead and play around with this. There are also different shapes to how you can utilize the proportional editing. We can pick something even rounder with sphere, and I'm on vertice select, move it up, so you can see it bulges out quite quickly when I am moving that section. So I'm switching between face, edge, and vertex select to shape this out. And if you're not liking anything you're doing, just go ahead and undo a couple times and then give it another shot. So for this one, I'm just creating a bit of a bush type shape, trying to make it a bit more organic. And you can go ahead and do the same as well. Let's continue to edit the rest of the rocks and bushes. I'm going to speed up the video in a second here. But one tip I have, in case you are having trouble zooming in or rotating around the object you're trying to edit, which can happen quite a lot in Blender. An easy fix for that is when you go to View, you can go down to Frame All, or the shortcut is the Home button on your keyboard. And when you do that, it'll reset the zoom. You could also click the object you are trying to edit. And you can see when I zoom in, it goes into this section instead in the middle of the scene. So I can go to View, Frame Selected, and I can easily rotate when I edit this object. Another shortcut is the period key on your number pad, or if you press the tilde key, you have a pie menu, and you could click View Selected to zoom in. All right, so those are the tips. Go ahead and edit the rest of your rocks and bushes. Just be sure to turn on and off the proportional editing when you need it or not, depending on what you are trying to model and how you are wanting to model it. From here, you can choose to pause the video and model your rocks and bushes, and I will see you in a second. Okay, I've gone ahead and modeled my rocks and bushes. We'll move on to the fence line next. Let's make our way back here to the fence and shift select these objects. Okay, so once these are selected, let's go ahead and go to View, Local View, Toggle Local View, or the shortcut is /. That'll help us focus on these objects that we're selecting. And the cool thing about this is we can go into edit mode and edit them all at once, even though they are separate objects. And from here, we are going to be using the loop cut tool to add some extra edges and cut into our object. So that way we have more vertices that we can use to transform our fences. So from here, you could left click or use the shortcut Control-R. In the middle of the face, you can see that this yellow line starts to preview where the loop cut will appear. So if I left click here, I then have this box that shows up for how many loop cuts we can add. So for this one, we'll go ahead and add 3 and then hit left click to confirm so it stays in place. And then over here, let's go ahead and try it the shortcut way by pressing Control-R. And this way, if you want to add more, you can scroll on the middle mouse wheel. Okay, so here, let's add 3. From here, you can still move it around and hit left click one more time to confirm its location. Okay, so Control-R. Let's do 2 loop cuts here. Left click, maybe drag this one up. And let's say I actually want to add a 3rd loop cut down here. So Control-R. Left click, drag it, left click again to confirm its position. So let's add another one here, Control-R, scroll on the mouse wheel, left click, you can also right click and that will help confirm it. And over here, Control-R, maybe on this one I'll add 4, left click, right click. Now to make things a little bit more interesting and it's not so perfectly even, let's say you actually want to now move this edge maybe up or down. So let's go into edge select mode, or number 2 for the shortcut. And we're going to select this entire edge all around by pressing Alt and left click. And to move this, instead of pressing G, so this is gonna slide it this way. However, to do a proper slide, so you want to press G and G to do an edge slide. There we go. And let's say I want to move this one up top. GG. There we go. Let's go ahead and add some vertical loop cuts. So Control-R. Scroll on the mouse wheel. I'm going to add 2 here. Left click, right click to leave them in that position. Control-R. Same thing. Control-R. 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 Now that we've added more loop cuts and vertices, we can transform them to just make them a little bit more interesting, perhaps more stylized. So I'm switching between face select and edge select. I'm selecting this whole entire ring here. I can use scale, just make this perhaps just a little bit larger. And I'm holding down Shift to make the change a little bit more gradual. And when doing this, my recommendation is to be fairly subtle with it. So we don't want to make this a little bit too extreme like this. You'll be surprised how far a gradual change will go. especially in the larger context of the entire scene. So go ahead and pull on these faces, edges, and vertices. Move them around just like the rocks. And if you need to, you can toggle between local view, so you can see how it's looking with the entire rest of the scene. And if you need to focus on an area, just like behind this tree, since I can't see it, I'll switch to local view. Go ahead and make your own changes, and we'll talk about the next section in a second. So see you then. Here's where I got to with my fence. And for some of these corners, I decided to add a bevel just to give it a bit more of an angle here. Although I kept this one sharp, but again, to bevel, just select an edge, Control B. You could add that, or if I wanted it a little bit rounder, I'll scroll on the mouse wheel, like so. Now we can also work on the fence rail here in the middle. And for this one, since it's kind of subtle the way it's overlapping, I'm going to go ahead and shrink it down just a bit, just to have a little bit more overlap. SX, actually let's go SY, and I'm just making it a little bit skinnier here. One thing too, if it's really hard to see, we can go over to our shading options with this drop down menu. If you scroll down, so instead of the material color, we can click this to random, and all this does is create different colors for each object. But it isn't the actual color of the material yet. We'll get to that in another section. So here you can see it's much easier to see. I'll still go into local view, go into edit mode, add several loop cuts. So Control R, scroll my mouse wheel. I think this should be plenty. Left click, right click, and I'll go with each one and perhaps start to maybe make this one a little bit taller. Maybe I'll bend this one down. I'll go outside of local view if we can actually see some of those edges here. So GZ, maybe move this one down. Maybe I'll widen this up a bit, just to give it more of an angle. Perhaps down here it's a little bit too straight, so I will bring it down. Since it's hard to see all the loop cuts we created here, what we can do is activate X-ray mode, or the shortcut is Alt-Z. So up here, if you click on this, we can now see through these objects and select perhaps this area. Maybe I want to make this a little bit larger. You can see how it's affecting the silhouette. And we can also press GG to edge slide. So move, and slide it across if we want this edge on the outside where we can actually see it. So Alt left click, GG, slide it across, or maybe I just want it on the inside, but I want to decrease the size so that angle goes into this fence post a little bit more. Maybe I want this taller edge a little bit closer to the one on the right. So have a play with that, and once you're finished editing, you can exit X-ray mode, go back to object mode. And with that, it's not so robotic and perfect anymore. Gives it a little bit more personality as well. Next up, what we can do is combine all of these smaller objects into one large object. So to do that, let's go ahead and shift select these fence posts and picking the rail last. Now, one thing to note, since I picked the rail as the last object, it is outlined in yellow, meaning that is the active object. So when I combine these, they will all combine into the active object. If I shift selected this fence post on the right as the last one, and it's outlined in yellow, everything here will combine into this object, and it will retain this origin here. For this purpose, I'm going to go ahead and shift select the rail in the middle as the last object. Go to Object, scroll down to Join, or Control J for the shortcut. And now we can see that it's all now one color because it's one object. And we can see that the origin is right there in the middle where the railing used to be. And the reason for this is you may want to have the fence as its own object, and we can duplicate this here, move it on the x-axis, rotate it on the z at 90 degrees, move it on the x and the y by pressing G and then Shift Z. I'll place it right here. And now we have two fences in our scene. Even though these are now combined into a single object, we can still go into edit mode and make some changes. Perhaps we want to make it look different than the other fence that we copied it from. So if we want to make some adjustments, we can do so just like usual in edit mode. This is usually helpful if we see duplicated objects that are too similar in the scene. So creating some changes like this can help add a little bit more variety. Now some areas may be a little bit harder to get to, such as this railing here that's inside of these fence posts. What we can do is go to select linked or Control L for the shortcut. There we go. Perhaps we just want to move the entire rail down to make it even more different than the other one. Or perhaps I want to duplicate it, Shift D, Z. And just so it's not so repetitive, what I'm going to do is rotate on the y-axis at 180 degrees to flip it around. And then I'll rotate again on the Z at 180. So I flipped it twice, and we can see that these look quite different from each other. So again, if I hover over here, I can press Control L to select a link, GZ, since these are all attached to each other. So L, if I also want to move this in, shrink the whole area, just like it was a separate object, by selecting the linked areas. The last thing we'll adjust in this section of the video are the trees here. Let's select this one, View, Frame Selected, to focus in, and let's use isolation mode, so /. Now when you go into edit mode, you'll notice it's really difficult to select multiple faces or vertices with geometry such as this. And if I were to go to a side view and try to select everything here, it's only selecting this portion and not all the way through. So this is where X-ray mode and wireframe view would really help out. So selecting this top icon here to the left side and toggling X-ray mode, we can go to a side view. I'm going to go to vertice select number 1 and drag and select. And from here, you can see that we selected all the way across on these vertices. Now, the reason for that, while this is selected, I can make adjustments such as bringing this down a little bit more, making it a little bit larger. And let's say I just want to select this row of vertices. Okay, we can do shortcut Alt-Z for X-ray mode, go into side view, select just these vertices. Perhaps I want to move them down, S scale, make it even larger, and then bring it down. So now maybe I have a more cone shape for that tree. I could also edit the top. Let's say I want to select these vertices here. So again, X-ray mode, let's go to a side view or front view, select that row of vertices. Maybe I want to shrink it in. This one, maybe shrink it even more. Okay, so pretty happy with that tree. Let's move on to this one. For this, I will just use some proportional editing. So O to activate that. I'm going to select a couple faces, G, scroll on the mouse wheel, maybe a vertice here, pull it across, X-ray mode, vertices, select these. Perhaps I'll bring these lower, turn off proportional editing. There we go. We can also add some geometry while in edit mode, but I want to place something here. So I'm going to press Shift S, move our cursor to selected area, Shift A, add another icosphere. Perhaps I'll place it here, and I'll also transform it. Proportional editing, move it across, Shift S, cursor to selected, Shift A, icosphere. Whoops, let's turn off proportional editing. There we go. Shrink it down. Maybe I'll make this one a little flatter here. I'll turn on proportional editing again. Just kind of move this back. There we go. And perhaps that could be a tree, although not quite happy with it yet. I'll keep adjusting this accordingly, but go ahead and experiment with yours as well. I'm going to add one more, move it across, bring it down. And since I added the meshes while I'm in edit mode, when I go back to object mode, you'll find that it's actually all still one object here. I know we covered a lot in this video, but I hope now you are starting to get more and more confident with using Blender. And on top of that, our scene is really coming together. In the next video, we'll be adding the final pieces to our doghouse. I'll introduce a few common modifiers, and we'll also wrap it up towards the end by adding colors to our project. So see you then, and don't forget to save your work.